from July into the beginning of August, I was reading The Royal Family by William T. Vollmann, which is the third of his sort of loosely connected prostitution trilogy. The three books are Whores for Gloria and Butterfly Stories, and this one, The Royal Family. This book is basically twice as large again as Butterfly Stories and Whores for Gloria combined. And it takes a look at the same themes he was looking at in those books about prostitution and degradation and salvation, ultimately salvation in degradation, and how does that look? Specifically, Whores for Gloria is kind of an extended prologue to this book. It takes place in San Francisco, and it kind of covers the same exact territory, whereas Butterfly Stories is a bit more introspective in a specific character and not so much in the general lifestyles of the prostitutes of San Francisco. Vollmann's writing is superb here. It is dark, and he's not afraid to show you the dark side, like the darkest sides of humanity, the way people are violent and addictive and predatory. But as always, his prose is beautiful, and he knows when to really bring up that high level of language to, the contrast between the bass and the low, and the flowery prose is really excellent here. You can see this book has about like 500 chapters. It's maybe 700, 800 pages with really short chapters, and it's split into all of these books. Book 17, Buying Their Dream House. I think there's about 35 or 36 of these books, and so of course this formatting makes you think of like the Bible or the Old or New Testament, which makes sense because a big theme of this book is that all of these kind of dejected, forgotten people, they bear a mark of Cain, or at least that's what the one of the main characters sees it as. It's like a shining light, like a beacon on their forehead, a literal mark that other dejected folks can recognize. This man is a private detective, and he's looking for the queen of the whores, and he finds her, and their relationship is sort of spurred by the death of his brother's wife, who he has a relationship with, that the extent to which they engaged in any physical relationship is kind of a mystery, and it's a driving force in the book. But Vollmann, I can't imagine another time when a writer was just so unafraid to shirk any notion of any sort of real salvation. Like this is it doesn't get good. It doesn't get good for the characters in this book. But why is that? And how is there still beauty in it? He's so great at doing that. Certainly not for the faint of heart. Certainly I wouldn't recommend it as your first Vollmann, but it's this huge, it's really, really big. It's kind of, I think it's maybe his first or second book that was released after Infinite Jest, and people put Vollmann and DFW in the same conversation because they're contemporaries and they write big books, but this might be the closest to like a direct response Vollmann has to Infinite Jest, and it's long, and the font is really, really small. And one of the things I've learned reading these giant novels is that the best ones, as you're reading them, they just kind of alter your brain chemistry. And I can't say that when I was reading this book I was having fun, but I can say that after having finished it, I look back at that experience and totally in awe of what was done here. I love Vollmann. I want to read all of his stuff. Hoping to get some more of his soon. I think naturally I wanted something kind of cheery and not so bleak after going through 800 pages of drugs and prostitution and other horrible acts. So I went for Excellent Women by Barbara Pym, who I'd heard about for a few years as one of these 20th century female British writers who are, especially post-war, creating really lovely novels. I've heard her name in conversation with like Elizabeth Taylor and Anita Bruckner, who I like. And so this is my first Pym, Excellent Women. And it's about a spinster woman who has a young couple move into the apartment downstairs, and they're sharing a bathroom, and they have this really, the couple has this really sort of fiery relationship that totally throws off everything going on in the town. Very sweet and charming. Pym's writing is smart and very, very, the craft going on in the writing here is very good. She's funny as well, in the way that a lot of British books can be. And I really dig this like time period in England where it's post-war, and in the background of everything there's this kind of recovery and struggle going on, and this plays out as well here with one of the main characters are religious, and it's like a deacon, and there are all these questions of etiquette and faith and playing out in the wake of war. It was pretty interesting, and I like the colors on this cover, this nice plume edition. It's kind of floppy in my hands, so I had a really good time reading this one, and I'm looking for more Pym as we speak. After that, I went on my trip to Tokyo, and I brought 2 books with me because I knew I'd be reading on the bullet train, and I'd want to have a lot of time, in cafes, at the bookstores, relaxing. So I brought something cozy again. I brought NP by Banana Yoshimoto. I found this cool Faber and Faber mass market out here. I've never seen this one in the States. And this book, it touches on a lot of the stuff that Yoshimoto is interested in. She's interested in love, outside the bounds of traditional heterosexual love in the family, love between women and men. She's interested in young people trying to, unfold their own lives as their pasts and their families sort of create this world around them that they're trying to navigate. This one in particular, they're dealing with the translation of a book written by one of the characters' fathers, and this book deals with, or this story deals with the lives of the characters in a direct way. It seems like an evolution from the one I read earlier this year. I read The Premonition, which was published last year. I think I read it this year. And that book, it just didn't do it for me. It seemed like a kind of a rushed attempt at this theme that she was interested in, of the love in the family. And she really develops it here in a way that seems much more natural, and the flavor, tying it in with translating and the literary bent, it's really great. Yoshimoto's one who gives me the warm and cozies. I read her books for ambiance. I read her books to clear my head, and I've read maybe 10 of them now, and 7 or 8 of 10 have been wonderful for that. I can't recommend them enough. The other book I brought to Tokyo was Bluets by Maggie Nelson, and this book has been hyped up to me online by a lot of other booktubers and friends, and of course Maggie Nelson, I think, has become quite successful. I think I heard this book originally I was looking for like fragmentary books in a way similar to those of David Markson, who I seem to mention every time I want to make a video. He's on my mind a lot. I loved his postcard quartet so much that I'm looking for something similar. And so this one does that. There's like these 200 short, 200 and something, 230, 240 short pieces, entries into kind of a diary where she's considering the color blue, blue as like a concept beyond, you know, the visual sensation of light, and she kind of covets blue and wants to consume blue and be consumed by blue. And I think this book probably gets some flack for being a little too horny. It's definitely a horny book. Maggie Nelson is not shy writing about her sort of sexual, her dissatisfaction and her yearning sexually in here. There's lots of memories about past lovers, and you know, that's great. This aspect of the novel wasn't really made clear to me before I was reading it, so it came as a surprise. And I don't know, if I had known that going in, maybe I would have reacted to it differently. But I enjoyed this book while I was reading it. I might read it again in the future. It's so brief and breezy, but it didn't quite do it for me the way I'd hoped it would. But that's Bluets, and I'd like to read more by Maggie Nelson. I think she's got an interesting point of view. Following that, I read Homo Faber by Max Frisch. And this book was really cool. It takes place, it's across several continents and countries, about a man who's this very like logical man. He keeps like referring to himself as like a technologist, and you know, there's all these images of clockwork and film rolls and things acting as they should according to how they've been made. And Homo Faber is a nickname for the character, which means man the maker. So you can see how he's sort of interested, you know, that ties in with his way of thinking, incredibly logical. But he has this series of events that are utterly illogical. He meets people, and he comes across people from his past in ways that are kind of impossible to predict. And I don't want to spoil too much of the plot in here. Truly, the coincidences in here are profound, and coming to terms with all of this illogic as a logical thinker, you sort of see this man unravel. And the writing in here is really interesting too. They sort of Frisch is not interested in having a precise like flow of dialogue and exposition. Like, he'll have a paragraph like this of exposition, and then the response will be you know, a response to totally unprompted like dialogue, like, you know, a whole thing, one page, and then suddenly, yeah, and you wouldn't believe it, blah 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 blah. It's very, very strange writing, a little dry, I think. I think that comes from the logical perspective of the protagonist. But you know, if you're interested in you know, Europe in the 50s and kind of strange happenings, it was really great. I'd like to read more by Max Frisch. There's the scene in the beginning, there's like a plane crash, and I don't know, he's describing like what plane travel is like, the logistics of it in like 1948 or whatever, and totally wild. Like, I'd never read that before. It's hard to even imagine in this time. But really great book, excellent cover. I love this HPJ edition with this bright blue. Very cool. I finally read Dead Souls by Gogol. You know, this has been on my list for 15 or 20 years. I think, like, I know Rory Gilmore references it in Gilmore Girls, and I think since then I wanted to read it. But it's one of these books where the translation is like hotly debated online, and there's no clear consensus which is the best one. But I heard this one had, this line from Nabokov, an extraordinarily fine piece of work. This was his preferred translation. And so I went for it. It's not so common. It took me a long time to get my hands on it. And I don't know. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have worried so much about the translation. Ultimately, I think I had built this book up in my head in a way that it couldn't possibly be what I imagined. But the events of the book, the first half, he sort of proceeds. We're introduced to the main character, and he comes to this Russian town, and he sort of meets everybody and travels from one house to another. Comedic happenings as he's trying to purchase dead souls, and everyone has a kind of different reaction. These souls are like serfs that haven't been taken off the tax registry yet, so he can still collect, some sort of income for the deceased serfs. And then the second half, as his scheme is unfolding and people are finding out about it, there's some chaos, and the book is unfinished, so it doesn't really have a huge ending, but he sort of continues on his journey. This book doesn't have the second part. I think some editions you can get a second part that had been cobbled together through notes. The editor here, so this one, yes, translated by Bernard Gilbert Gurney with revisions by Suzanne Fusso, and she said that she didn't want to include the entire second part, so she just left an appendix with some excerpts and some nice letters as well. It's kind of a lot of humorous set pieces. He is interested in the intricacies of social etiquette. I really like this style where there's this big narrative going on, and there's all these author interjections, and there are stories within the story where he's well, before we do this, I should tell you a story about this farmer or this man or this lady. Really great stuff. He's also I really like these sort of social eavesdropping, where kind of the set phrases of the time pop up over and over again, and he'll be you would go into the parlor and hear such phrases as XYZ, and thinking about the slang we use today, right? Think about in 150 years, that being it's so common to hear these things, and it could be forgotten if there's no Gogol to record it. Maybe I'll read another translation one day, but this one was just so-so for me. I read Autumn Rounds by Jacques Poulin, and this is the third book by Jacques Poulin I read, and he is quickly becoming one of my favorite writers. I love Jacques Poulin. He's a Quebecois writer, and so all of his books are translated from the French, and there's 4 of them, I think, from Archipelago. They're all done by Sheila Fishman, and maybe there are 3 or 4 other books of his in translation but out of print around. He writes about his home province of Quebec. His books often deal with older gentlemen who are literarily inclined, either working as translators or old professors, and in this one it's a man who works in a bookmobile, which seems like kind of a book distribution service, subsidized by the Quebec government. So 4 times a year he drives this van around Quebec, and he stops off and let people look at the books and take the books, and the next time he comes around he will return them and hopefully get new books. And so you kind of have this meeting and departing happening, of books and of people. And at the beginning of this book, he meets there's a carnival in town, and he sort of becomes enamored of the owner of the carnival, another older woman. And he kind of confides in her early on that he's about to go on his summer trip in the bookmobile, and he says he has no intentions of being around for the autumn trip. And so it's kind of like a hint, I don't want to get old. I want to end my life how I choose, and this is going to be my last trip with the books. And so throughout his summer trip, this carnival is traveling similarly, but they sort of meet and diverge many times, and the relationship between the man who I think is just called the driver in the book. He's just called the driver. And the carnival owner, as it progresses, there's all these ruminations on reading and literature and death. And, of course, every time he goes back to a small town or village, there's some news of, the previous owner has passed away, or there are young people coming to look at the books for the first time. I absolutely loved it. I loved this book so much. This is the best one of his I've read. I've read Translation is a Love Affair and Mr. Blue. And he has one more from Archipelago called Spring Tides, which I think I ordered like right away, and it should be on its way. These books, they go in my mind with Banana Yoshimoto, not in their context or style necessarily, but the way I feel reading these books is, one of the things I look for when I read is besides books that give mental stimulation and are teaching all these interesting ideas and presenting experimental writing, I want to have a book that gives comfort and is kind of cathartic and healing. And the trouble with that is a lot of those books tend to be overly saccharine or kind of hackneyed and with poor writing. And so finding a book that does that for me with at least acceptable to good prose, that's kind of my, it's one of my reading kind of sub goals, right? I'm looking for books like that, and I have an idea of talking about these books, Jacques, Poulin, Yoshimoto, and others as kind of ambient literature. The way ambient music works for people, this is kind of ambient literature for me. And so I'm toying around with exploring that and maybe making a video in the future. But this is Autumn Rounds by Jacques Poulin, Archipelago. Thank you guys. Great book. I read Naomi by Junichiro Tanizaki, and Tanizaki is one of these giants of sort of modern Japanese literature in the first half of the 20th century. He wrote, this book I believe is one of his most famous, but he wrote the Makioka Sisters, and he wrote The Key, and I think I read Diary of a Mad Old Man, and he's got a bunch of books put out by New Directions, and it's real hit or miss for me. He's kind of the stereotype I have in my head of the lecherous old Japanese man. His books all tend to have older men and younger women, and the relationship thereof. And this one is no exception. The main character, Naomi, is she's sort of like a modern-looking girl. So this takes place in the 1920s in Japan, and it's kind of like a Japanese echo of the Parisian cafes and decadence in the 1910s and 20s. And Naomi in particular has a European face, or a Eurasian, as they say, face, and so she's kind of this exotic beauty. And he meets her when she's working. The narrator meets her when she's working at a cafe when she's 14 or so, and he says, "Hey, you come live with me, and I'll give you an education." And she's like, "Okay." And then they just sort of begin from there, and he describes their relationship. And this event is really steeped in the history of Japanese literature. This all the way back to the Tale of Genji, this sort of encountering young women and bringing them into your home to eventually become a courtesan or a lover or a partner. And definitely that was on his mind because Tanizaki has done a sort of modernized translation into modern Japanese of the Tale of Genji, which I would love. I mean, I would love that to be translated into English, but that sort of double translation, I don't know how well that would work. But so clearly he's interested in traditional Japanese literature and comparing that with the modern age. The relationship is bad. The girl does some not so. She's not so loyal to the man. The man is overbearing, and etc. for about 200 pages. The writing is okay. There are some passages where he's sort of being like devotional to Naomi, and like the sort of sublime beauty of this woman who he hates and loves at the same time. Those parts are quite excellent, and the set pieces of like the cafes and the dancing, especially dancing is like Western style dancing is like, oh boy, you're pushing the boundaries. And so for the time period is interesting. The story I found so. I've enjoyed Tanizaki's more like historical work. Like there's some stories I've read of his that I enjoyed. I might have to take a little break from him. Following that, Habitations of the Word by William H. Gass, which is a collection, I think, from the 80s. So he's been, writing essays, and he's been writing essays for a while now. He's got a lot of thoughts already out, and so this is a continuation of a lot of that. Gass famously, like every word, every sentence is beautiful, and it's like fireworks, right? It's like overstimulating. It's pop rocks in your brain. Alliteration and metaphor that are like so perfectly crafted. You can't believe he could think of one, let alone the like 500 that go through these pages. The essay in here about Emerson is like fantastic, and I'm dying to read Emerson now. I've been putting that off for too long. There's essays in here about his sort of thoughts about writing and about words and about reading, and it's just like his thoughts on that matter aside, reading him, it's so magical. The way he writes, I was trying to think of a way to put it that perhaps in a way echoes the way he crafts a metaphor. I imagine Gass as a kid with a whole bucket full of little plastic army men, and he's the kind of kid who could recreate an entire battlefield piece by piece, and show you the significance of each person at each point in the battle. He could describe this battle in history and why it's significant, but at the same time he could pick up a piece and tell you this guy's backstory and what he ate for breakfast, where this battle is kind of writing and reading and words in particular, and modes of writing and literary devices. It's beautiful stuff, and you get a heavy dose of his sort of his favorite writers in here as well. He's big on Rilke. He wrote a book about Rilke. There's lots of stuff about Henry James and James Joyce and John Barth. Especially there's a section talking about letters by John Barth, which I just happened to buy. And Samuel Beckett, specifically How It Is. And there's his essay in here on the death of the author, which is a sort of critique of Roland Barthes. He recommends a book by Ford Madox Ford, which I'd never heard of, and so I'll have to check that out. There's a whole essay in here about the word "and." He deals with these sort of postmodern constructions of language and representation. Wonderful stuff. Like I said, pop rocks in my brain. And at the same time, it makes me realize the steep climb I have ahead of me if I want to, fully grasp the kind of thing these guys are talking about. Aspirational writing. I love William Gass. Oh, and it's I believe it's this year is would be his 100th birthday. He passed away, I think, in 2017. So, happy birthday, Mr. Gass. I followed that with The Last Days of Terranova by Manuel Rivas, and this book is strange. I got it because it's an archipelago, and I love their books. I think they're beautiful, and I actually was able to get this one in Japan, which is really rare. So I picked it up, and it describes the last days of a bookstore in Spain. But really, the bookstore is kind of like the impetus for a discussion about like Spanish history in the 20th century and revolution. There are scenes that take place following the burial of Franco. The main character in like 2014 is sort of a crippled old man, and he is forced to liquidate, or there's a sign that says he will liquidate his bookstore, but he's sort of flip-flopping on that. And this sparks a series of memories about the founding of the bookstore and his childhood or youth in the bookstore. They would smuggle books from South America into Spain. I should say Manuel Rivas is a Galician writer, and this is the first book translated from Galician I've ever read. But it's so in the first pages, he describes like watching someone jump into the ocean, and there's an oncoming deluge. It's going to be fragile and bitter, and it's going to crash all over you. And I think that's sort of what he's trying to do with these memories. There's no clear plot. He'll jump around from point of view to point of view, from time period to time period, in between chapters, in between sentences and paragraphs. Like the point of view and the time frame totally shift. And so instead of like a huge deluge, it seems more like a spray of foam, like sea foam spraying all over the place. But maybe that's what he was going for, this kind of scattershot memory of Spain at that time. There's lots of allusions to like Greek history, characters named after Atlas, and one named Polytropos or Polytropos, which is Odysseus' nickname, meaning the many traveled, or the much traveled, and this is the nickname of the narrator's father, who was a owner in the bookstore. Lots of stuff in here, rock music and David Bowie, and the guy has a band. There's, as I said, book smuggling. There's like an archaeological artifact that's sort of like a totem of the family, and the kid, or the narrator as a kid, was it stuck in an iron lung. So there's this image throughout the book of enclosure in an iron lung. Lots of stuff going on in here, and putting it all together is the difficult part. And the one thing about this book which is really interesting to me is, I think in this blurb here from Kirkus Review, Rivas' sentences are aflame with philosophy and well-wrought beauty that at times supersedes the narrative itself. Roger's translation from the original Galician is lucid and musical. Some readers might feel unsatisfied with the novel's lack of cohesion, but it might also make them consider what undergirds the expectation of cohesion in a text, as beautifully incongruous as a human mind. Some readers might feel unsatisfied with the novel's lack of cohesion is a bright red flag. I never see anything that's like a negative, even suggesting a negative on a blurb. It's always like thought-provoking and devastating and tour de force and 5 stars from Stephen King, right? So then that should have given me a warning that perhaps this isn't the cute novel about a bookstore I had thought it was going to be. But the ideas in here are really interesting. I would like to revisit it and see, now that I know the structure a bit more, if there's if it's easier to find a greater structure going on here. Interesting book, definitely. The last book I read this month was Death in Equality by Lucinda Ebersole. Ebersole was an editor of Gargoyle magazine and several literary anthologies. all of them in like the Mondo series, Mondo Barbie, Mondo Elvis, so stories about those guys from lesser known writers. And this is her first, and I believe technically only novel from 1997. And I got this book online from Abe Books, sold by the one and only Stephen Moore. And he packaged this book into me with a letter addressed from Lucinda to him, which I think for now I'll keep private, but it's interesting to say the least. This book is really great. I loved it. There's sort of three strands happening in this book. It's about a woman who's dying of cancer, and as she's dying, her main, I suppose, regret as she's coming to terms with her death is that she had never been a writer and never wrote a book. And so we have her first person thoughts, which are given in this sans serif font, and then we have an omniscient narrator who is narrating her death and her decline, which we can imagine as sort of a projection of the novel she wished she could write. And then interspersed between those two sections, there are memories of the town of Equality, Alabama. The title comes from the main character Cordelia is the seventh Cordelia in her family, and all of them have died in Equality, and so she has come to Equality to die. And the stories, we have this first person narration and the third person narration about her death and decline, and then we have all of these memories about the town of Equality, and so she populates this town kind of like Winesburg, Ohio, or it reminded me a lot of this book, The Wives' Tale by Alex Wilbur, who similarly has a small town that she sort of populates as the book goes on. It's unclear, she's going sort of forward and backward in time. It's unclear how much of these stories are real or experienced firsthand or just shared with her. Perhaps these stories are short stories that she would have liked to written in a book one day. The influences of Ebersole as a writer and also the Cordelia, the character, play throughout the book. Especially, there's a story. Oh, let me get one more book. There's a story by Amy Hempel, and it's this one here, in the cemetery where Al Jolson is buried. Similarly, about a dying woman who is sort of being told non-essential facts. She doesn't want to talk about anything that's important or anything that she would have to remember as she's dying. So just, trivia, basically. And in this one, the nurses are feeding her trivia of national capitals, and she references Hempel's story. And the other books and writers and artists that influence Ebersole, I think, and Cordelia, they make their way throughout the book as well. And I love this. She gives, at the end of the book, a reading list, Cordelia's final reading list. And so you're seeing This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen, Paul Bowles, Faulkner and Fitzgerald. There's Amy Hempel, Primo Levi, Malcolm Lowry, Breeze Pancake, and Kennedy Toole. And as a reader and a book lover, I had been familiar with at least half of these, and so going online and reading about them in this book and checking them online, kind of filling in the pieces of the life of this person. I love this idea. I think I'm going to make a final reading list when my time comes. I love this idea. I love this book. It's got 5 ratings on Goodreads, and I want more people to read it. This book is moving and powerful and quirky and fun. I really would love to see a repress but that might be unlikely. I don't think it's too expensive to find online though. You might be able to get one for like 10 or 15 bucks. I forgot to mention the last part about this. Ebersole passed away herself in 2017 from a brief battle with cancer, which mirrors the death of the character in this book. And knowing that now, it makes this book all the more powerful and moving. She had a blog where she wrote pretty regularly until she passed, with recommendations and daily life stuff. She seemed like she did a lot in printing magazines and literary reviews. It would be it really makes it makes me think a lot about my life as a reader. This was a really, really moving book, and I wanted to thank Lucinda.